It's the Eagle Community Television Forum with your host, Gary Shorman.
Hello, you're watching the Eagle Community Television Forum. I'm Mike Kerner in for Gary Shorman this week. Remember, if you've got questions, comments, or show ideas, Gary would love to hear from you. It's gary.shorman@eaglecom.net. And today we're honored on the forum to have Senator Jerry Moran with us. Thank you for being in town and coming by to visit us.
Mike, it's good to be with you. Good to be in Hayes. Good to be back in western Kansas. Away from Washington, D.C. for the weekend. I'm home for the weekend.
Well, that's nice. You're around some people that voted you in and really happy to have you here.
You know, it hasn't changed from the House, the United States House of Representatives, to the Senate. It's still home back to Kansas every weekend. And that's an important part of the way I want to do my job. It gives me the chance to have conversations with lots of Kansans, and they can kind of poke me in the chest and remind me what's important to them and help me establish my priorities, but mostly to make sure that I don't get messed up with Washington, D.C., and that we stay pretty true to the way Kansans think, kind of common sense and good judgment, and not really so much Republican versus Democrat, but about like trying to do right things.
Well, I remember you when you were way back in the Kansas Senate and going now to also being a representative and now to senator. You've always been that way, in touch with people. And I think a lot of people out there wish more senators would be that way, come back home more. And I know some of them do travel a long distance, Washington, if they have to go to the West Coast or things like that. But it's nice that you can stay in touch with the people and know what they want. Because again, in reality, you're the representative for them in D.C.
My job is to represent Kansans. It's to pay attention to them. I've never thought it's to like take a poll on every issue, but how they feel about things matters to me. If I have a different approach or a different answer to a question than the Kansans I'm talking to, it causes me to rethink, try to make certain that the way I'm looking at it is that I can confirm that I feel that I'm right. You know, our daughters were 6 and 8 when I was elected to the House of Representatives. Here in Hayes, and we believe in our schools here. We believed in our community. Didn't want to raise our kids in Washington, D.C., and we made the decision, Rob and I made the decision that we're not moving to Washington, D.C. I'm going to be the one who travels, and we'll keep our roots here. And that was a great decision, and at least initially it was about our kids and how we wanted to raise them and where we wanted them to go to school. But it became very clear to me that Washington, D.C. is a place that can mess with you, can change the way you look at things. You know, Washington, D.C. is 24/7 politics. It's all about who's up, who's down, the game of politics. And when I was younger, that was interesting to me, a lot less so today. So I'm very appreciative of the way that Kansans hold my feet to the fire. This trip back to Kansas for the weekend, I made a point of visiting with my dad and having a meal with him most weeks. But during this trip, it gave me the chance to walk Main Street of Plainville, the drugstore, the grocery store, the banks, the hospital, just kind of touching base to see that even in my own hometown, what am I missing? And that's very, very valuable to me. And we talked about this on our last program when I was here. 1,000th town hall meeting. I think we've done 12 or 13 since then, and we're working to put one here in Ellis County together. We've talked to the Chamber of Commerce about a date and try to do a chamber coffee and take questions and complaints and suggestions from the folks here in Ellis County.
Well, I know that a lot of people that you see every day, they have budgets at home. So let's talk about that as our real big meaty question here out of the gate. They have budgets. They have to follow those budgets because at the end of the year or end of the month, the end of the week, when they don't have any money in their bank account, they can't pay those bills. Federally, on the federal level, you've got a budget now. Everybody's given and taken on this budget. Can we talk about the budget a little bit and what went into that?
Absolutely. I mean, a difference between Kansans, you and me, Americans, you and me, than the federal government is at the end of the month, if we don't have any money, we don't have anything, we can't buy anything. We might then put it on our credit card, but at some point in time, the credit card is no longer available because we've met our credit limit. Unfortunately, in a sense, the federal government has kind of, at least the theory, the belief is by many that we have an unending credit card, and it's not true. We don't, and we've got to work much harder. We've got to be much more determined and disciplined to quit spending money we don't have. The good news, as you say, is a budget was developed. The bad news, just to show you how dysfunctional Congress has been, is there hasn't been a budget that has been approved by the House and Senate in 4 years. How do you expect the federal government to operate if they can't even reach an agreement on what the budget is? By law, the Congress is required to pass a budget by April the 15th For the last 4 years, that hasn't happened. This year, there was a number that was agreed upon, the so-called Ryan Murray budget. Ryan is a congressman, Murray is a senator. Both chair the budget committees in their respective houses. They came together and worked to develop what we'd call a top-line number, or the total amount of money that can be spent in fiscal year 2014, fiscal year 2015. So actually, we've got a budget or a budget number in place for 2 years. So that's progress. I voted against the budget because I think it spends too much money. It increases the amount of money that can be spent. It pays for that increased spending by claiming we're going to make savings years from now. And we know that that won't happen. Congress will not live up to its commitment to spend money today and pay for it by reduced spending 10 years from now. Having said I voted against the budget, we're now, and I'm a member of the Appropriations Committee, it's now my belief that I have the responsibility to work to fill in the blanks on the budget. And that means 12 appropriation bills. And for fiscal year 2014, both the House and the Senate have now passed those 12 appropriation bills, filling the blanks in on the budget. So not only do we have a budget for this year, we also have the detailed spending that goes with that budget within the budget number. So we're living within our budget, we can say that. My complaint is the budget number that we're spending is still too much money. But the good news is, in the absence of approving those spending bills, probably one of two things would take place. What's happened in the past, we've passed what's so-called a continuing resolution that funds the federal government at its current level into the future. Nothing changes, just every program gets the same amount of money as it had last year. Well, that's not smart. There are programs we ought to get rid of. There are programs that maybe deserve more money. There's programs that are inefficient and could use can get by with less. It never forces you to figure out what you need and what you want. Those are separate things, and we ought to recognize that. So the good news is that we've now gone through an appropriation process that better prioritizes what our spending should be, increasing some here, decreasing some here, and in some cases not spending it on programs that have been in existence for a long time. Now we begin the appropriations process for the next fiscal year. So had we not passed those 12 appropriation bills, we probably would have passed a continuing resolution, leaving everything on autopilot, not good, or we would have had a government shutdown, which is what happened a few months back, in which there was no agreement on passing a continuing resolution or any appropriation bill.
Now, for people of Kansas to strike home a little bit, Eisenhower funding was left out, but spending was, I believe from your website, there was some spending that was on McConnell Air Force Base.
A couple of things. We don't have earmarks. A member of Congress no longer can specifically designate something that he or she wants for their district or their state. So these are not earmarks, but because the president requested and because the Congress authorized, passed a law saying that this is appropriate spending, we have a couple of things in this budget bill, in this appropriation bill that are significant, hugely significant for Kansas. One of them you mentioned is McConnell. Several months back, McConnell was chosen to house, to maintain, and to fly the new tanker. Long process that we've been going through of replacing the old tanker with the KC-46A, which is Boeing is now building. The sad part about that is they're not building it in Kansas, and that was a huge fight over a long period of time. The good news is the Air Force decided that McConnell Air Force Base, Wichita, Kansas, is the best place to have that tanker be deployed, to be maintained. And so we'll have lots of activity at McConnell, which means jobs and military personnel in our state. And this bill funds the necessary construction for hangars and pavement parking for those tankers. About $227 million is appropriated in this bill to take care of the tanker soon to be located at McConnell Air Force Base. Good news from a Wichita, South Central Kansas. Good news from a Kansas perspective. The other big significant item is, long time talking about this, in fact 10 years, NBAF, the Agrobioscience Research Facility on Plum Island today, which is an island off New York City. We do agricultural research designed to keep our food supply safe, to avoid a terrorist threat that uses agriculture as the weapon. And that facility, after a long competition, Kansas was chosen as the best site in the country to replace Plum Island with. And the question has always been, so that decision has been made, are you ever going to appropriate the money to pay for it? And a significant portion, in fact, significant enough that the Department of Homeland Security should now be able to enter into contracts to build the facility, was included in this appropriation bill. So those are a couple of good things as far as spending money. A couple of other items in the appropriation bill that were important to me and I hope important to Kansans. We made clear that the President can't implement the arms trade treaty that he negotiated at the United Nations dealing with the Second Amendment rights of Kansans and Americans, that there's no money that the President can spend. We're trying to get around the President's inclination that even if Congress doesn't, by law, by the Constitution, a treaty has to be approved by the United States Senate by a 2/3 vote. There are not 2/3 of the senators who will vote for this treaty, but we're worried the President's going to try to implement it anyway. No money can be spent by the administration to implement the treaty or any portion of it until the Senate ratifies the treaty, which they will not. We also made some improvements in the budget agreement, took away some of the retired military benefits for disabled veterans, and to some degree that was fixed in the appropriations process.
Well, we've got an agreement on a budget. How about an agreement on a farm bill? That's coming up too.
Well, again, it demonstrates how dysfunctional things are and have been. This is the third time since I've been in Congress that we've been dealing with a farm bill. A farm bill usually is passed for a 5-year period of time, puts farm policy in place for that 5-year period, and then Congress, 3 or 4 years into that 5 years, starts developing what the next farm bill should look like. The House and Senate the House has had a difficult time passing a farm bill. Senate passed one 2 years ago before the farm bill expired. The House failed to pass one. Now both the House and Senate have, and conference committee has been appointed to work out the differences between the House version and the Senate version. And the farm bill expired at the end of last year, 2013, so we have no farm bill in January. And the expectation is that we'll get it concluded, an agreement reached and passed by the House and Senate here in the next few weeks. And the most difficult issue, the one that's keeping this farm bill from being concluded, is dairy policy. How do we treat dairy farmers? It's a Kansas issue to some degree, but it's very complicated, and people have different philosophies about how to avoid bad times in dairy agriculture.
So you feel you're pretty close on it?
Everything, I've had conversations with both the committee chair in the House and the Senate. Everything I know, every conversation I've had, every discussion I've had suggests that it's just a few days away, but we've thought that for quite a while now.
Very good. Some great answers to some questions that we have for him today, and that is Senator Jerry Moran, our guest on the forum. I'm Mike Kerner. I want to thank you for being a part of it. We've got a break, and we've got more questions for the Senator in just a few minutes. Thanks for being a part of our show today.
Youthful body, tight tummy, smooth facial lines. Greystone Cosmetic and Reconstructive Surgery is here to help you achieve your goals and give yourself the new look you've always wanted. Greystone offers sophisticated surgical and non-surgical cosmetic procedures. With services now available locally, there's no need to wait any longer. Contact Greystone Cosmetic and Reconstructive Surgery at Hayes Medical Center today or online at greystonecosmetic.hayesmed.com.
It's a beautiful day in our super high-speed internet great customer service neighborhood. Like you, this is where we live. In fact, our company is employee-owned, so it's our goal to improve the quality of life for everyone in our community by delivering faster, more reliable internet, clearer, more feature-laden phone service, and tons of high-definition TV channels, all with a level of customer service and value you'd expect from people who are your neighbors. Eagle Communications, our community connected.
Welcome back to the Eagle Community Television Forum, brought to you by HMC. I'm Mike Kerner, in for Gary Shorman this week. And again, you can look for us on Facebook. We've got the Facebook website up there as well. Our guest today is Senator Jerry Moran. Thanks for being with us today, Senator.
Mike, good to be here.
In the second half of the show, I want to talk to you a little bit about some questions I know that are really popular in the news right now. And what I want to go with is health care. That seems to be a topic that a lot of people are asking about. A lot of people ask us, how can we afford it? Is the government going to get this website solved? Are they going to get a lot of this cleaned up? What's your thoughts on it?
Well, Mike, I'm of the view that the Affordable Care Act, so-called Obamacare, is such a disaster, it's nearly impossible to tinker with it to make it work. And having said that, it's a difficult circumstance because clearly President Obama, as long as he's president, is not going to let any legislation, or the Democrat Senate would never let any legislation to undo it. And so what you've seen is the president, I don't know by what authority, keeps changing the rules, the policy, extending things, delaying things, trying to avoid the bad consequences. And you know, the greatest complaint, and I hear it all the time, is we were told if we liked our policy, we could keep it, and that has turned out to be so far from the truth. I've had an interest in healthcare long before President Obama was president. I mean, much of my focus has been how do we keep healthcare available to Kansans regardless of where they live, different in Wichita, Topeka, and Kansas City than it is in Plainville, La Crosse, Russell, Abilene, the places that many people call home, working hard to try to make certain that the federal government understands how difficult it is to keep hospital doors open and physicians and other healthcare providers in our communities. Unfortunately, I think Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, is another detriment toward keeping rural America alive and well when it comes to healthcare. So you've seen a lot of politics, Republicans and Democrats fighting about this, but now that the website failed so miserably, now that the policies that we were told we could keep, we can't, soon we'll discover that the premiums, many people have already discovered, but more and more will discover that the premiums are going up, the co-payments are higher, the deductibles are higher. There's just real problems. And from my point of view, surely we can figure out how to help people who have no insurance and little money to pay for health care without doing so much damage to the people who had something that was satisfactory to them. And so there ought to be, and again, in my view, we always should do things slowly, incrementally. This massive change is a huge problem for Americans. In addition to the healthcare aspect of this, Obamacare is very damaging to the economy. Businesses are not expanding, not increasing their employment. Examples of businesses, I mean, business people tell me that they're not expanding because they can't get more than 50 employees or they come under the Affordable Care Act. So it just, I mean, I've had people tell me they're closing aspects of their business to keep from having to comply with the Affordable Care Act, because if they had to comply, they'd put them out of business. So it's a huge deal and hard to solve in this political environment where you have a Republican House that is opposed to Obamacare, you have a Democrat Senate where the Democrat senators are strongly supportive of Obamacare, and you have a president who's bragging about how good it is. So a difficult one to fix, and I consider my job, a significant part of my job is to solve people's problems. And people tell me problems all the time with this legislation, and we can't find the solution like I'd like to.
Well, I know that you've worked for a long time with rural health care providers within Kansas. What's some of the feedback they're giving you about what's happening with this Obamacare? What kind of effects are they going to see over the next few years?
Well, part of the problem, Mike, with Obamacare and just generally with Medicare, the issue here in many aspects is Medicare. So many of the patients that are admitted to a hospital in one of our area hospitals in Trego County are on Medicare. And if Medicare doesn't cover the cost of providing the service, it becomes very difficult for that hospital or those doctors to financially stay in business. And unfortunately, the Affordable Care Act piles on in a couple of ways. One, it promised more benefits than it paid for. So every time Congress and the President try to figure out how to pay for a benefit, usually the answer has been, most of the time, if not all the time, over my voting no, is to pay a hospital less, pay a doctor less, pay a occupational therapist or a physical therapist less. And ultimately, if you pay somebody less than what it costs to provide the service, they're not going to provide the service. So we get damaged again where such a large portion of our patients are on Medicare. And the other way that Obamacare is very damaging to rural Kansas is we need more providers, not less. And in my view, and I hear this from physicians and the statistics, to the degree that I've seen them back this up, more and more physicians are deciding to retire early, and fewer individuals are deciding that they want to be doctors, for example. And that's a terrible outcome, because if you are a physician, you graduate from medical school, and you have significant debt, it's less likely that you're going to come to a rural setting than it is that you're going to go to an urban setting where the opportunity to make more money, either for just you want more money or you need it to take care of the student debt obligations. That's a real difficult circumstance for us. We have communities in Kansas that desperately and continue to search for doctors. I've visited all the hospitals in Kansas. There's 127. I'm kind of making those rounds again, and particularly since the Affordable Care Act. I was in Hoxie recently and toured and visited the hospital. Same with Phillipsburg. I will soon be in, recently, I guess late last year, visited the hospital in Russell. Toured here, Hayes Medical Center, about a month ago. Soon we'll be in Smith Center. Again, touching base with hospital administrators, with patients, doctors, nurses, trustees, trying to make sure that we do not want to mess this up. Let me say it differently. I think Congress and the President have already messed this up. We need to figure out how to solve this problem, because if we lose our doctors in our hospitals, we lose our healthcare providers in communities across western Kansas, across Kansas, we lose our communities. Young people don't take the risk of living in a community where there's not access to health care. Senior citizens reluctantly move away to where they can access the things they need in their later years.
Well, let's go to our last topic here, because I know we're running out of time. It's going to be about the NSA. Let's explain real quick to people out there watching. They hear a lot of things in the news about this NSA probe and NSA getting into our records as citizens of the United States. What exactly, from a congressman, can you explain, I guess, to people out there, what is the NSA?
Well, the National Security Agency, and the part of post 9/11, after 9/11 occurred, Congress created a whole new structure designed to try to increase the safety and security of Americans at home, including the creation of a department called the Department of Homeland Security. But they reorganized how the CIA worked with other intelligence agencies, and they put a director in charge of that process so that there was, I guess, a better chain of command. I didn't vote for the creation of the Department of Homeland Security, put 189,000 people in one department and think we're going to be better off. I think we created a huge bureaucracy. But having said that, NSA is charged with a very significant and serious responsibility to try to protect the safety, security, the lives of Americans. Now, I'm on the side that believes that we ought to have a greater ability to expect our government not to intrude in our lives, to protect our privacy. American citizens need to be treated with great respect, and anytime you intrude, I mean, the Constitution pretty well outlines that our privacy is ours, and in order to invade it, you need a warrant. You need to go before, that law enforcement needs to go before a judge and convince them that there is a reason that government has to get involved in the privacy and the lives of Americans. And that's not happening here. I think in my view, there's a different standard if you're not an American citizen, if you're not in the country. And so privacy matters to me, and I have a sense that I want government to be narrowly involved in our everyday lives. And so this has become an issue, as we've learned from Snowden, who was able to release significant amounts of information about what was going on in the United States and to some degree around the globe. And what we discovered is that Americans are far from safe and secure from their government being able to, and not only being able to, but actually doing things that invade their privacy. And so the President this week has outlined his thoughts, returned to some of it suggests that Congress needs to deal with this issue. All of which, I mean, I certainly agree that Congress needs to deal with this issue. We're looking at various pieces of legislation, but it's a hard one. How do you, again, find the right balance in protecting the safety and security of Americans at the same time protecting their security?
Well, I wonder sometimes as an outsider, and this is just my opinion here, that the NSA, I wonder who's leading it. Is this kind of, it almost seems like it's a rogue type agency, and because you'll see the Obama administration come out sometimes saying, we didn't know this was happening, and then you see other opposing people in the aisle saying they didn't know it was happening either.
I don't care whether it's a Republican president or a Democrat president. In my view, we ought not let a president get off the hook by saying, I don't know what's going on in my administration. He is tasked with knowing that. He's tasked with surrounding himself with people who know that. And the administration, the president's responsibility is to put people in place who will abide by his policies and certainly abide by the law. Almost everyone who works for the federal government has raised their hand and sworn to protect the Constitution. And I'll be critical of Congress. Oftentimes we talk about how that's an unintended consequence. You ought not let members of Congress off the hook. It doesn't matter whether it's unintended or not. You did something. You, Congress, did something that's causing problems for people, and it's why we ought to do our jobs better, more seriously. We ought not delegate. So on the congressional side, don't let us off the hook for saying it's an unintended consequence. And on the presidential side, no president ought to be able to say, I'm sorry, I didn't know what was going on over there. Heads should roll in that circumstance.
Very good. Great answers today.
All right, thanks.
We have some great questions, great topics, and I know your time is valuable. We're out of time here. But again, we want to thank you for joining the forum today. I'm Mike Kerner in for Gary Shorman. Want to thank our sponsor, HMC. Again, this is the forum. You can also check us out on Facebook. Again, thanks for joining us on the forum on Eagle Community Television.
Youthful body, tight tummy, smooth facial lines. Greystone Cosmetic and Reconstructive Surgery is here to help you achieve your goals and give yourself the new look you've always wanted. Greystone offers sophisticated surgical and non-surgical cosmetic procedures. With services now available locally, there's no need to wait any longer. Contact Greystone Cosmetic and Reconstructive Surgery at Hayes Medical Center today or online at greystonecosmetic.hayesmed.com.